All right, we are going to jump into Joseph. It's week 5. This is the last week of Joseph. We are basically going to see a conclusion to our soap opera, okay? Because honestly, that's kind of what it feels like, at least to me, with Joseph, is if you break it up into like 8 short episodes, you could drag this out. And that's what it feels like, a soap opera. At every turn, something seems to go wrong. So I'm going to do a quick recap real quick. You probably already know the story. You may already have heard me say it, but just so we know what we're talking about today, remember, Joseph was 17. Okay, his brothers hated him because he was the favorite. So they decided to kill him. Then at the last moment, they decide to sell him into slavery instead. He does well as a servant, rises to the top of his master's house, only for his master's wife to then lie about him, accuse him of something he didn't do. So then he gets thrown in prison. He spends 2 years in prison. After 2 years in prison, the Pharaoh finally has a dream. No one can interpret that dream, but Joseph is remembered by the baker. And so Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, and Joseph would tell you Joseph did not interpret the dream, but God interprets Pharaoh's dream, and Joseph relays the message. He is made second in command to Pharaoh. So now he's got a lot of authority, he's in charge. And it's at this time, so Pharaoh has this dream that tells about 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine, right? And Joseph has prepared Egypt for this famine, so they have food to go around. But Joseph's family, his brothers, his father, they didn't know about this famine. And so they've run out of food, and his father sends his brothers to go get more food. Joseph sees them, but they do not recognize him. And we talked about this last week, he kind of does like a weird dance with them, right? Where he calls them liars, he throws them in prison, then he asks to see his younger brother. Then he gives them as much grain as they can carry, but also gives them their silver back. He gets to see Benjamin, his youngest brother, but then he sets him up as like he stole something, and Benjamin's going to be his slave now. And it all ended where we ended last week, was with Judah, his brother, the same Judah that suggested to sell him into slavery. That Judah is again in a situation in which one of his brothers might be a slave in Egypt, but we see a change in how he reacts. As opposed to allowing it to happen, he steps up and basically says, like, I'm responsible for my youngest brother's life, and so please take me as a slave instead, right? And so all of this happens, and we see it happen in a way or a fashion in which obviously the brothers make a mistake. They screwed up terribly. They did something really horrible. But we also see the redemption within the story, in which they have an opportunity to almost make different choices in the same situation. As opposed to letting their youngest brother be in slavery, they have now kind of redeemed themselves and said, no, we'll do anything to make sure he makes it back home, right? And so we have all of this culminating. We have all of this happening, and it's going to end today because what Joseph does is basically Joseph is going to reveal himself to his brothers. All right, they're going to learn who he is, and what we should take away from this, what we should watch for in this, is that we have to understand that Joseph, in this story, Joseph is a mirror or a reflection of how God treats us. We talked a little bit about that last week, but we'll see more of it here. You see that Joseph tells his brothers who he is, and then he only really ever treats them with kindness. That's it. We don't see this massive punishment or this revenge game going on. He treats them with love. He treats them with kindness. And so Genesis 45, 1 through 15, that's where we're going to pick up. Genesis 45, 1 through 15. It says this. It says, then Joseph, so remember, Judah just got done saying, please make sure, please take me instead of Benjamin. My father will be grieved. He'll die if you don't let Benjamin go home. That's the end of chapter 44. We pick up right into chapter 45. It says, then Joseph could no longer control himself before his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. All right, so first and foremost, I don't want you to miss the emotion of this passage. It's easy to read this, and we read words like weep or cry, and we miss out. I don't know if you've ever heard someone bawl loudly, like not a kid, like an adult. Okay, an adult cry loudly or weep loudly, right? There's an emotion. It's not a sound. First and foremost, it's not a sound that we really enjoy, right? It doesn't make you feel good to hear somebody weep loudly. There's something along with that. Joseph, it also doesn't seem that he's weeping tears of joy, all right? It's not why he's weeping. It doesn't seem that that's the context. I'm going to go out on a limb and just say maybe he's not crying because he's so happy to see them. Okay, it seems that he's weeping because there's still some hurt, there's still some pain. He's heartbroken at the situation. So he's weeping loudly as an adult. Don't miss the kind of emotion that's going in to this situation. I think it's also important to understand that, and this may be just a Baptist thing, so don't throw anything at me, but I think sometimes as Baptists, we also get this idea like if we show too much emotion or if we let people in on what's bothering us, like we tell people too much about the pain or the hurt we're experiencing, that like maybe we don't have enough faith, right? That's not what we see here though. Joseph is very open about how he feels. We don't see very often here in the story of Joseph where Joseph loses control of his emotions. But that's what it says happens. It says Joseph could no longer control himself. So in this situation, he's weeping loudly. The Egyptians hear, his brothers are hearing, they're watching it. Don't miss the emotion, the depth of the emotion that's going on. On the other side, we have these brothers who, this might be the worst thing that could have happened for them as far as they have a sin, they have a crime in their past that they don't want anybody to know about, that they have obviously, it makes sense that it's shown, we have evidence that they regret it. They think it's one of the worst things they've ever done. They know it was bad, so they don't want anybody to know about it. And now the person who was a victim of their worst crime is standing in front of them. And not only is he standing in front of them, he's standing in front of them as second in command to Pharaoh of Egypt. All right, so he pretty much has authority to do with them whatever he'd like to do. All right, and so even though I imagine on some level he's weeping, so they feel bad, they feel sorry, there's also that selfishness of, well, but what about the repercussions we're about to go through? Right, because at the end of the day, when we do things badly, we do feel bad for the people that we hurt, we do, but as humans, we can't help but also feel, well, but how exactly am I going to get in trouble for this? Right? We'd like to get off scot-free, but that's not always what happens. And so we worry about what's going to happen to us. In verse 4, Joseph continues and says, Then Joseph said to his brothers, Come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, to save your lives by a great deliverance. All right. What? Can you imagine, just for a second, all right? I told you last week, we all would like to be Joseph in this story, but we're really the brothers, right? We're the sinners. Imagine if you were standing there and you're looking at the brother that you sold into slavery, that you hated so much that you were going to kill him, but last moment you decided to sell him in slavery instead. And 13 years later, he's in charge of all of Egypt, standing in front of you, and he says, don't be angry or distress yourself with the fact that you did what you did. Like, that would be a crazy instance. How am I supposed to take that? What does he mean by that? How is it possible that Joseph just goes, hey, don't worry about it, right? But the reality is that Joseph is mature enough, almost seems as though his emotions are back in control. Joseph is mature enough to recognize what God has done through these circumstances, all right? He understands the benefit that has come from his bad circumstances, the bad things that were done to him. Now, take note, he does not say what you did was okay. That is not what Joseph says here, okay? So don't get that in your heads. What they did was horrible. You're never going to see Joseph tell them it wasn't horrible, okay? What they did was bad. But you don't see Joseph say, hey, what you did was okay. Instead, he almost phrases it in a different way as far as like, hey, don't distress yourself. Don't be angry about it anymore. It's kind of in the past. What happened, happened. But it's okay because it's worked out because God has orchestrated it. So it's all right. It's not that you're absolved from your actions, but you are all right because God has used this for good, right? He's just explaining to them. I do want to point one thing out. This is more of a selfish thing, but on Wednesday nights we do Prime Timers Bible Study, which we call it Prime Timers Bible Study. Anybody's invited, so you're always welcome to come. But we're still going through Romans. We did the series on Romans. Well, we're still in Romans. And we read Romans 11, and Paul is talking about this fact that most of the Israelites have rejected their Messiah, right? But he talks about the fact that there's a remnant that has accepted the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and that God has kept his people alive through a remnant. And I just wanted to point out to those who were there and we were talking, notice the language again in verse 7. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth. So almost like a side note for just the prime timers, but you see that this language of God keeping a remnant alive by a great deliverance, Joseph recognizes he's a part of that. I have been used so that I may help keep God's people alive and provide a remnant for them on earth, right? Continuing in verse 8. So he tells them, do not be distressed, all right, that God has used it for good. He ends it by saying it's for great deliverance. He says, so then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. All right, so here's the first thing I want to address on this. Verse 8, he says, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God, right? Here's what I want to clarify for you real quick so I want to make sure you don't miss it or you misinterpret it, okay? By no means is Joseph suggesting that God somehow made the brothers sin so that all of this could happen. That is not in the character of God. That is not how he operates, okay? That is not how this functions. What Joseph is saying instead, okay, what I want you to get from this, what I want you to understand is that Joseph is saying, you committed a crime, you did something very bad, but God is better than your wickedness, okay? That's what he's saying. God is better than your wickedness. You decided to do something evil. It was meant to hurt me. That was the point. But even in your sin, God is still in control and orchestrated everything, all right? You could see this in a different way because if we say that if we say that the brothers decided to sell Joseph into slavery, and it's thanks to them that now he's over all of Egypt, right? In almost like a perverse kind of way, it's thanks to them. It's because of their actions that he's in charge. Joseph is clarifying that. He's basically saying you did something wicked, and it's not because of your actions that somehow I became over all of Egypt. No. You did something wicked, but it's by God's grace and providence that he orchestrated everything so that I may be in charge of all Egypt and be a great deliverance. All right? So it's not so much absolving them. It's not saying, oh, well, God made you sin. No, it's recognizing God made you sin, but thankfully, But thankfully, he also is in control and orchestrated the rest of this so it could be used for good. And that's why you shouldn't feel distressed about it anymore. You shouldn't feel distressed about it anymore because what's done is done, and God has used it for the benefit of all of us. That's why you shouldn't feel distressed anymore. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but this idea of God's grace and providence being greater than our wickedness, right? You start, again, we're seeing Joseph act as a reflection of God's grace and love. We see this in the New Testament. Paul says, my sin increases, and yet your grace increases all the more, right? We're seeing this, but we're seeing it from the very beginning in Genesis. This idea that though we are wicked, though we are sinful, God's grace and providence is far greater than our wickedness, right? It's already showing the character of God and how he treats his people. Verse 12, he continues and says, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded to me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterwards, his brothers talked with him. So there's reconciliation finally. I told you from the very beginning, week 1, that when we see what Joseph does and we see how he acts, understand the goal is always reconciliation. That's what he wants. He wants to be back with his family. He wants there to be peace between them. And so finally they get that. And not only are the brothers being forgiven here, but they're being blessed. Notice how the brothers' greatest sin, God uses for their family's greatest blessing. Right? That is how good our God is. That's how he works. He's after reconciliation. He's after peace. And though we sin against him, he still loves us and wants grace and reconciliation with us. He wants a relationship, right? Now, I don't know what the brothers talked about. I don't know what you say. I feel like they probably talked about the weather too. What do you say to somebody that you sold into slavery? Like, my bad. I don't know. But it says they talked. What happens is they bring Jacob. The brothers leave. They go get Jacob, his father. They bring Jacob to see Joseph. We're skipping about 5 chapters here, so I'm paraphrasing. I would encourage you to read 45 to 50. But Jacob comes. He gets to see his son again, Joseph. They embrace. He blesses his sons, right? He blesses Joseph's sons. And then there comes a time in which Jacob is going to die, and they know it. And so they get ready for this. And so I wanted to skip ahead to Genesis 50 and talk about a conversation that Joseph has with his brothers, because I think it kind of encompasses this entire story. It's a good conclusion. So Genesis 50, 15 through 21. That's where we're going to be. 15 through 21. Here's what it says. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong we did him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. I'm going to assume their father didn't leave these instructions. That's what it seems like. It seems like they're kind of just making this up, right? Okay. So your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servant of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. We'll talk about that in a minute. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. All right, first thing I'll point out for you in this little passage is just, if you had any doubts about whether or not God made the brothers sin, or the brothers knew what they did was evil, or they regretted it, let the passage show you that they recognized what they did was very wrong. right? Because as soon as their father dies, as soon as kind of a trial hits, or they feel like some of their protection is gone, their minds immediately go back to feeling like they deserve to be punished. That's where their mind goes. If you remember last week, Joseph gives them grain, puts their silver back on top of their packs, right? They leave, they realize their silver is with them, and they immediately go to, oh, they're going to think we stole everything. Almost this mindset of we deserve to be punished for the wrong that we have done. They're still in that mindset here. We deserve punishment for what we did. Joseph, now that our father's dead, Joseph is going to have this awakening and realize that we deserve punishment for what we did to him. So we better make some rules or tell him a story so that he won't hurt us. The second thing I'll point out is Joseph's response. Right? Again, and I'm going to get out on a limb here, okay? Again, I'm going to say Joseph did not weep out of joy, okay? I'm going to say he wept because he was grieved. Why was he grieved? Why was he grieved that his brothers would send him this message? Well, you can go ahead and put parentheses on the sermon right now, okay? Just start of parentheses. This is a little bit of speculation, all right? This is not from me necessarily. This is not from the Bible necessarily. It doesn't elaborate, but I'm going to give you my interpretation of why I think Joseph is weeping at this point. So parentheses, I think Joseph is weeping at this point. I think he's grieved and he's saddened. And why is he grieved and saddened? Because he has already forgiven his brothers. He has given them reconciliation. The relationship has been repaired. He has loved and cared for them and provided for them, and yet they still don't believe him. They still don't believe it. It's unfortunate, but Christians today struggle with this same mindset. See, they believe that God saves them. They believe that he's given them grace and that he's made them righteous and they're a child of God now, and they rest in that peace, knowing that for a little while, but then somewhere along the line in the Christian walk, they convince themselves, well, but I need to keep doing things so that I stay in God's favor, so he doesn't get mad at me, because I know I deserve punishment, and so one day God's going to kind of wake up and realize, and he's going to, do like an audit on me and see if I've been acting like a real Christian lately, and if I haven't, well, he's going to take back everything he gave me. But see, that's not the way it works. And so what these Christians do, unfortunately, is they start working on legalistic actions that they can measure, right? Like, well, if I make sure that I read my Bible this certain way, or if I make sure I pray enough, or I make sure I'm kind enough, or I act and say the right words all the time so that nobody sees how unchristian I can be, right? If I do all these right things, then when God audits me, he'll be able to see that I'm worthy of the love, of the grace that he's given to me. But the reality is that we are just never worthy of what we receive from him. No matter what the brothers do in this story, you're going to see me flip-flop back and forth here because there's a parallel going on. No matter what the brothers do in this story, they will never be able to make up for what they did to Joseph. It's impossible. We talked about that last week, the amount of years they stole from him, the amount of relationships, the family time, the experiences, the suffering he went through. Nothing they can do will ever make up for what he went through. Nothing we do will ever make up for our sin and our rejection of God on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. There is no action that we can take that will make up for that. And so Joseph, in my opinion, is grieved here because even though he's already given them forgiveness, even though he's told them it's okay, even though he's given them grace and there's reconciliation, they don't believe it. And I have no doubt, in my own mind at least, that God feels the same way, that I've forgiven you. I've given you grace. I've filled you with righteousness. I've given you the Holy Spirit. I've made you a child, an heir to everything that I have. I love you. There's grace. There's mercy. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to bless you. And yet, you still think that somehow I'm going to get on to you, or I'm going to find a reason as to why I don't love you. And instead of living for me in confidence and trust and faith in who I am, instead we live in fear and anxiety that somehow our God is going to look for retribution on us. But that's not what he asks us. He does not ask us to live in fear and anxiety about what he's going to do to us next. He asks us to live in confidence and trust and faith and be obedient. Don't get me wrong. Should we be obedient? 100%. But we shouldn't be, I'm going to put this forth. I'm not going to say think. God's not asking you to be obedient because you're scared or fearful of him. That's not where that motivation for obedience is coming from. God wants you to be obedient because you have confidence that he loves you and you love him. It's about the motivation in the heart. Remember, we've talked about that. About the motivation in the heart that matters. God doesn't just care about what you do, but why you do it. Joseph, in the same fashion, he doesn't want his brothers to live in fear and anxiety of him. He wants them to live in a repaired relationship of love and grace with them. But that's not what he sees. Instead, they apparently still live in fear. And that grieves him. All right, into parentheses, that's my opinion, okay? Now, we need to recognize, or it's important for us to realize, Joseph, yes, is a story about trials. It's a story about how we should continue to have faith and trust in God, even when our lives are not going the way we want, or when things are out of our control, or we endure sufferings that we had nothing to do with, right? But it's also a story of us recognizing how God treats sinners. That though our past is ugly and we've done wrong and we've gone against him and we've messed up, he's not looking to punish us. He's looking for reconciliation. He wants to accept us. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. He accepts us. We need to accept him. Sorry, I got a whole sentence ahead of myself. Pretend you didn't hear that. Edit that out, Matt, all right? He has already accepted us. He loves us. He needs us to accept him. There's a responsibility in our part to recognize, like the brothers did, that we sinned, recognize our sin, own up to that sin, but then ask for grace, ask for mercy, ask for love. If, whether it's, whether you're Christian here, whether you don't know God, I would encourage you that I would use the evidence in this last passage to just tell you, to remind you, to make sure you know that there is nothing that you have done, could do, or will do that somehow is too much for God's grace and providence. Your sin will never be greater than what he can provide you. And so I would encourage you to not hold on to that. Don't be distressed and angry over what you've done. All right? You got enough time in life to worry about things you could have changed or could have done differently. It happens. But God is not looking for some sort of retribution or trying to punish you. That's not what he wants. I know some people get that in their head. That's why they don't want to enter a church. God may smite them or do. That's not what he's looking for. He's not a kid on an anthill looking for a reason to get onto you. It's not what he wants reconciliation with you. He wants to be in a relationship with you. But you have to realize that and you have to talk to him. And so if you need help doing that, Christian or even a person who's a non-believer, either way, if you need help doing that, feel free. Ask us to pray with you. Talk to us. We'd love to walk you through that on how that happens. How you can work towards and have a conversation with God and understand that his love is just going to be way bigger than anything you think you've done that's too bad. Lastly, in Genesis 49, you don't have to turn there, but lastly, before Jacob dies, the father, before Jacob dies, I don't know if you do it. When I read this, I get Israel, Jacob, and Judah I get them all messed up, all right? Two, because they start with J's, and then it's like, well, sometimes the Bible says Israel, but sometimes they say Jacob. Anyway, so Jacob, the father, before he dies, he tells his sons to gather around him, okay? And he tells them, gather around me. I'm going to tell you how your lives are going to be. Basically, I'm going to kind of give you a little glimpse into what your life is going to look like. okay? Some of it was good, some of it was bad, depending on which brother you were. But I wanted to read or just end today with what he has to say about Joseph. All right, remember, Joseph is this standard that we would love to live up to. We'd love to react and live and be in trust in a relationship in the way Joseph was with his God. This is what Jacob says about Joseph. In 49, verse 22, he says, Joseph is a fruitful vine. Almost feels very New Testament-like in that phrasing, right? Fruitful vine. Jesus says that he's the vine, we are the branches, we will bear fruit, right? So Joseph is a fruitful vine. A fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility. But his bow remained steady. His strong arms stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and the womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Let me pray for us.